By 1919, the war in Europe was over. President Woodrow Wilson had gone to France and been disappointed with the peace treaty at Versailles. The European nations, which had suffered so much and been destroyed in many ways, were not willing to accept the points that Wilson brought to the table. At home, Wilson returned to neglected tensions, and to make matters worse, he was in ill health. The travel and stress of the peace conference had exhausted Wilson, and in October of 1919 he collapsed while speaking in Colorado. He had suffered a stroke and almost died. He was paralyzed on his left side, partially, but made a remarkable recovery. His wife Edith tried to protect him by being very elusive about his illness, but this just allowed rumors to swirl in America. Some stories had it that Mrs. Wilson was exercising the president's powers. Others had it that he had gone insane, and Mrs. Wilson had him locked in a closet in the White House. The last thing the nation needed at this time, right after the war, was an incapacitated president. Without Wilson's leadership, there was no plan for demobilization after the war. The War Industries Board closed up, war contracts were canceled, and workers and businessmen were left to cope with converting to a peacetime economy. The armed forces began in 1919 to discharge soldiers, leaving many young men out looking for jobs. To make matters worse, a flu epidemic
killed some 22 million
the Spanish
people,
flu on an
twice
epidemic
as many
scale
as the
around the
war.
world.
In the U.S. alone, some 500,000 people died. No one knows exactly what caused it, but the U.S. servicemen brought the flu back with them from France. It got so bad that you could be fined for spitting on the sidewalk or sneezing without a handkerchief. Phone booths were locked up, as were other public facilities such as dance halls. Americans felt vulnerable. This was not helped by the fact that a brief post-war boom ended in 1920 and a general business slump followed. Labor unrest worsened the situation. Prices continued to go up after the war, and workers, discontented and free from constraints of wartime, were more willing to strike. In 1919, some 4 million workers went out on strike. Some won demands, but the mood towards labor organizations turned hostile. Foreign ideas were targeted for blame. The mayor of Seattle blamed the strike there on Bolshevik influence. Moves by the American Federation of Labor to organize leaders brought accusations of radicalism, communism, and socialism. The biggest or most notable strike of the period was the Boston police strike. Police officers there wanted to get a charter for union from the AFL, but the police commissioner began to fire those who began asking. The police went out on strike. Then Governor Calvin Coolidge, soon to be president, mobilized the National Guard. The police returned, but the commissioner would not reinstate them. In addition to strikes and flu epidemics, there was racial tension as well. 1919 brought a series of race riots in the North and the South. In Texas, a white mob went through the small black neighborhood in Longview, Texas, searching for a man accused of having an affair with a white woman. Shops were burned. In Washington, D.C., reports that a white woman was attacked aroused white mobs, and for 4 days, whites and blacks did battle until soldiers restored order. 38 died, 537 were injured. The public responded to the wave of strikes and riots with fear. The Bolshevik Revolution was thought by some to be the cause of such unrest. Many feared that, like Russia, the turbulence could be the prelude of a revolution. After all, it was just a tiny faction in Russia that had exploited circumstances there. War hysteria against the Germans easily turned to an attack against the left, or Reds. This would be America's first Red Scare. Fears of people about leftist radicals might have remained latent, but there were real concerns. In April of 1919, the post office recovered some 40 bombs. Some of those bombs got through. Many were addressed to prominent citizens, the most notable, Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer. And when one bomb was received at his home, this was enough for the government to take action. The Justice Department began to deport radical aliens, and Palmer set up a new division of the Justice Department, the General Intelligence Division, or FBI, precursor. A young J. Edgar Hoover was put in charge and began collecting files on radicals. A series of raids, known as Palmer raids, began. Agents moved in on the Union of Russian Workers in several cities, and some 249 people were deported without a court hearing. At the beginning of 1920, police rounded up some 5,000 suspects, many taken without warrants. This would culminate in the trial of two Italian immigrants and avowed anarchists, Sacco and Vanzetti. Their trial became a cause célèbre of intellectuals, painters, and writers. Their story would be written about and captured in art, such as this picture by famous American artist Ben Shahn on the wall of my alma mater at Syracuse University. This seemed to take things a little bit too far. In addition, the bombings tapered off and communist revolutions in Europe died out. Even when a bomb went off on Wall Street, killing 38 people, Americans were ready to see it as the work of a handful of radicals rather than a large piece of Palmer's Bolshevik plot. The Red Scare, as we know, left a legacy. It stigmatized labor unions, led to restrictions on immigration. But there were more disappointments of the post-war year of 1919. Disappointment even affected America's national pastime, baseball. After the favored Chicago White Sox lost the World Series to the Reds, rumors started that Chicago players had thrown the game. They had taken payoffs and then bet secretly against their team. Evidence came out thanks to an investigative sports writer, and a grand jury in Chicago indicted 8 accused players. At trial, a jury acquitted 7 of them, but the commissioner of baseball barred the players for life. The press would write that the sport was ruined forever. Of course, we know different. But this demonstrates that even Americans who were not worried or concerned about politics or social issues wondered what their country was coming to. This would be the precursor for what we would later know as the Roaring Twenties, and a boom would follow this dip or malaise of post-World War America.